There are 5 fundamental principles that guide all of your thinking. And in fact, they're so fundamental, you've likely never even noticed them secretly functioning in your daily life. But the world's most brilliant minds don't only notice them, they use them to make new discoveries, generate innovation, and make connections between different ideas that most people miss. In this video, I'm going to draw upon my years of experience as both a peer-reviewed value theorist and entrepreneur to show you how to use these to become the smartest and most innovative person in the room. Starting with the first of these fundamental principles, probability. You've probably heard of the idea of mental models for decision making and problem solving, but let's be honest, there are dozens of mental models out there, and it's almost impossible to think of which one out of those dozens you should use in a specific situation, especially when you're under pressure. That's why we need to dig deeper, to the very foundations of literally all mental models that exist. And it's these 5 principles that underlie every single mental model you've ever heard of. Probability is one of those, and by understanding how to use probability at a fundamental level, we can solve complex problems and come up with solutions much more easily. Yes, we could be hyper-theoretical here, and trust me, I'd love to do that with you, but is there a simple way of using probability to achieve these goals? Yes, and it's called Bayesian reasoning. During World War II, the scientist Alan Turing and his team used a form of Bayesian reasoning to break the German Enigma code. They constantly updated their probability estimates based on intercepted messages, refining their understanding of the code's settings. Instead of guessing randomly, they used each new clue to update their beliefs, narrowing down possibilities until they cracked the system. So then, how exactly does Bayesian reasoning work, and how can you use it in your everyday life? Well, let's say you're considering a big decision, a job, a project, a relationship, and instantly your brain starts spotting flaws and overthinking. Sound familiar? That's totally normal. It's called negativity bias, and we all deal with it. But here's the real question. Are those flaws genuine red flags? Or is your brain's negativity bias just filtering reality? Bayesian reasoning gives you a way to step back and think objectively. And here's how to use it. First, set up 2 competing hypotheses. Hypothesis 1, the situation really is risky or flawed. Hypothesis 2, the situation is fine, but your brain's negativity bias is exaggerating the flaws. Now, think practically. If the situation really is bad, how likely are you to notice flaws? Pretty high. Let's say 90%. That's called your likelihood for hypothesis 1. But even if the situation is fine, your negativity bias could still make you spot flaws. Maybe that happens 60% of the time. That's your likelihood for hypothesis 2. Next, assign your prior probabilities. Your general belief about how often situations are genuinely negative versus fine. Maybe based on experience, you think there's a 30% chance situations are genuinely negative. That's your prior for hypothesis 1. There's a 70% chance they're fine, but your bias kicks in. That's your prior for hypothesis 2. Now, to compare these hypotheses and therefore get to the bottom of what's the reality here, you multiply the likelihood by the prior for each hypothesis. Finally, take the ratio, which we see here is equal to 0.64. A ratio less than 1 means the second hypothesis is more likely given the evidence. A ratio of more than 1, that means the first hypothesis is more likely. So in this case, it's more probable that the situation is fine. It's just your negativity bias is exaggerating the flaws. And this is precisely the beauty of Bayesian reasoning. You don't have to be very accurate with these numbers. Having at least some ballpark figures of probabilities is actually enough for you to sit down, perform this calculation, or simply roughly reason through it without doing the actual calculations, and make better judgments by preventing your brain from playing tricks on you. But probability is just the tip of the iceberg for making both fast and accurate judgments. That's why we need the next principle on this list, logic and mathematics. Okay, so don't worry, I'm not going to make you do a bunch of math. Instead, let's understand 2 aspects of this principle which are crucial. 1, deduction, and 2, induction. Albert Einstein used both of these masterfully. He used deduction from established physics, such as the constancy of the speed of light, to derive new conclusions. He relied on induction, observing patterns in experimental data that classical physics couldn't explain. Einstein wasn't just logical, he was strategically aware of the type of reasoning he was applying. But again, how can you apply this in your own life and become more strategically aware of the type of judgments you're making? Well, for one, you can use logic to think outside the box and make connections others usually miss. And this is how to do it. Let's say someone tells you that career path is never financially secure. Notice how this statement is formulated. It's formulated as a general statement or principle. Because of this, we can consider it deductive. The average person would hear a statement like this, hear a few examples that confirm this principle, and then believe it. But you're smarter than that. With deductive judgments, the key to thinking outside the box is to continuously try to think of counterexamples. What's an example of someone who followed that specific career path that most people would think doesn't lead to financial freedom, yet they achieved financial freedom? Well, then you just found an exception to the rule. That person probably did something far outside of the norm for that industry. And from there, continuing to dig deep into what they did can provide new insights for you, even if you're not going to go on to completely replicate what they did. So, do you see how the simple habit of looking for counterexamples to general principles is a simple yet almost guaranteed way to think more creatively? But what about induction? Well, with respect to induction, that kind of logic is simply the use of probability, as we discussed before, so we won't dig deep into that. So far, it seems like we're just learning how to think like a robot, right? Okay, I get it. We're missing the human element of thinking, and that's where our next principle comes in. Normativity. Normativity, simply put, is the act of value judgment. You make value judgments when you get out of bed in the morning. You make them when you spend, save, or invest money. You make them when you spend time with family or friends. You, and crucially other people you interact with, can't help but make value judgments constantly. And so if you can learn how to navigate and understand other people's value judgments as well as your own, you'll not only become massively influential, you'll have genuinely better relationships with everyone around you. And by the way, if you want to watch an entire masterclass where I cover this topic in detail, check out the link in the pinned comment below. During the negotiations to end apartheid in South Africa, Nelson Mandela used what we'll call value mapping. He didn't just focus on his values, equality, justice, and human dignity. He also took time to understand the values of the people in power, many of whom feared losing security, status, and identity. Instead of dismissing those fears, Mandela mapped both sides' values and used that map to create common ground. He framed the transition not just as a moral necessity, but as a pathway to peace, stability, and even economic growth, values the opposition cared about. And that's value mapping at its highest level. Understanding the deeper motivations behind others' actions and tailoring your communication strategy to align with or address those values, rather than continuously talking or shouting back and forth with no resolution. But how could we possibly achieve what Mandela achieved? Well, the basic foundation is to recognize, one, that different people operate according to different models of value, and two, that there are certain clues we can look for to determine what those models are. There are many ways people think about their own value systems, and of course, we can't cover them all here, but the three most common ones are the following. 1, utilitarianism, 2, deontology, and 3, virtue theory. Who do you know who always tries to optimize things? Optimize their return on investment, optimize their focus, optimize their muscle gains, and so on. These people are probably utilitarians. These types of people always try to maximize value, whether that's money, happiness, or some other tangible good. To communicate and work effectively with these types of people, we need to understand, 1, what they are looking to maximize, and 2, how to harmonize our needs with what they want to maximize. The next type of person is our deontologists. Who do you know who always talk about their duties or other people's duties? Conversely, who do you know who is always prioritizing people's rights? These are both forms of deontology. To get along with these types of people, we therefore need to focus on 1, identifying what they perceive as their or others' duties or rights, and 2, finding a way to satisfy or at least appeal to those rights or duties in some way. Lastly, who do you know who is always focused on self-improvement or who prioritizes growth above all else? These can be thought of as our virtue theorists. To work well with these people, it's very, very simple. Find ways to give them opportunities to grow or help others grow. Okay, I can already hear you telling me in the comments that this is an oversimplification, and it totally is. But it's at least helpful to think in terms of these categories in our everyday interactions so we can learn how to effectively speak someone else's value language. Speaking of language, this is where our next principle becomes incredibly important, and that is truth and meaning. Now, the ideas of truth and meaning are fundamental to literally everything and have been endlessly debated by philosophers, with the structuralists on one hand setting out to create an axiomatic system of postulates to describe them, and with the post-structuralists on the other hand setting out to demolish ideas of fundamental truth and meaning. Needless to say, I'm not going to attempt to settle this debate here. Instead, let's understand one distinction within this category that you can use in your everyday life to understand and communicate with people, including yourself, more effectively. And that distinction is denotation versus connotation. In his famous I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King repeatedly used the word freedom. Now, the denotation, the literal definition of freedom, is simple. It's the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved. But the connotation of that word, the emotions, historical weight, and cultural meaning, is far more powerful. For his audience, freedom carried the legacy of slavery, segregation, and centuries of struggle. It evoked hope, justice, and human dignity. Dr. King didn't just rely on the dictionary definition. He spoke to both the literal and emotional meanings behind the word. That's why his message resonated so deeply, and why smart communicators always evaluate both denotation and connotation when they speak. And to show you just how pervasive connotation is, consider this. Imagine a dog. Now, think hard about it. What do you see in your mind when you think of a dog? What's the breed of the dog? The size of the dog? The color of the dog, and so forth. You see, I just imagined a medium-sized brown poodle in my mind because, guess what? I have a medium-sized brown poodle as a pet. Her name is Athena. She's adorable. The point here is that, even with respect to simple words and phrases, we each carry different associations. And so the key is never to assume someone understands you exactly as you meant to be understood. Clarify. Ask questions. Be curious. Find out how the other person best understands and receives a concept. Because at the end of the day, it's irrelevant what you meant when you said what you said. What's relevant is how the person you're speaking to understood it. While it's important to understand how others perceive meaning and truth, it's even more important to start with yourself. Which brings us to the final fundamental principle of reality, consciousness. In his meditations, Marcus Aurelius demonstrates what we'll call observer mode, the ability to mentally step outside your own perspective. In the chaos of politics, power, and war, Aurelius trained himself to pause, observe his thoughts and emotions like an outsider, and question them before reacting. Instead of being swept away by anger, pride, or fear, he'd ask, "What am I feeling? Why? Is this helping me act wisely or just react emotionally?" And this isn't just some ancient, outdated technique. Observer mode is one of the most powerful cognitive habits you can build in our modern world. Because the reality is, your mind generates constant noise, random thoughts, emotional reactions, self-doubt, frustration. Most people are trapped inside that noise. But top thinkers, they step outside of it. They observe, they notice the emotion, they question the thought. And because they're not blindly reacting, they make better decisions, stay calm under pressure, and see situations more clearly. So next time you feel overwhelmed, frustrated, or reactive, activate observer mode. Take 10 seconds. Mentally step outside yourself. Watch the thoughts and emotions pass by. Research has shown that this is how you build a clear, composed, and peaceful mind. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.